Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome in to my Week 8 start and sit analysis for the running back position. Week 8, we're almost halfway through the regular season already. So insane how quickly this year is going. And I want to apologize. Hopefully my face is not too distracting in this video. I understand that I look like an absolute mess. But my son's youth football team that I coach the offense for is going to be playing for a city championship this coming Saturday. And you can't shave a playoff beard until the playoffs are over. And as fate would have it, we're Lions fans, but we also play for the Lions organization here in town. So do me a favor, in the comments down below, leave hashtag #GoLions to spread a little bit of good luck for my son and his teammates as they play for a city championship going up against the Patriots this Saturday. But it's time to hop into all the information, and we're going to kick it off on Thursday Night Football with Aaron Jones going up against Kyren Williams and what hopefully brings us a whole lot of fantasy points. When Aaron Jones is healthy, he looks solid. The big play potential is still there with him, and he's just as explosive as he was in Green Bay, but he's got to stay healthy. Last week against the Lions, he looked healthy. Good bounce back for him. And now he's going up against an LA Rams team that allows the 7th most fantasy points to the running back position. I'm feeling really good. Fingers crossed about Aaron Jones this week. Now for Kyren Williams, his matchup isn't nearly as favorable. Minnesota is currently allowing the 5th fewest rushing yards and the 9th fewest fantasy points to the running back position. Jahmyr Gibbs got him a little bit last week, but so far this season, they've been pretty solid. We know that Kyren Williams' chances of scoring a touchdown every single week is about as good as anybody in the NFL. And the LA Rams should be able to move the ball a little bit through the air in this matchup. And if they get in the red zone, then Kyren Williams has that touchdown potential. But that's really where his ceiling comes from this week. It is a tougher matchup, and if he doesn't have that burst and explosion that Jahmyr Gibbs does, some of those big plays may not be there for him. So we're going to be hoping for those touchdowns instead. Philadelphia and Cincinnati are both coming off huge wins last week, and Saquon Barkley is coming off one of the biggest games of his career, absolutely torching his former team in their home stadium. But it wasn't like that massive performance came on 30-something carries. He only carried the ball 17 times last week. He averaged 10.7 yards per carry, and he only had 2 receptions. So the workload wasn't really all that big anyway. Philadelphia got off to a huge lead, and they let Kenneth Gainwell finish it off. This isn't an awful matchup going up against Cincinnati, and I'm going to be willing to bet that Saquon Barkley has a super solid floor once again. I'm not loving this matchup for Chase Brown this week, but let me give you some good news first real quick. In week 7, Chase Brown saw a season high in snaps. Right now, he's getting well over 60% of the snaps for running backs in the Cincinnati backfield. He clearly has become the number 1 for this team. And when we get some easier matchups, Chase Brown will be a guy that we're absolutely looking at as an RB2. But in this matchup against Philadelphia, that ceiling may not be attainable. Moss is still going to get a little bit of work in the passing game, so we really got to hope for that Chase Brown touchdown this week to give him the upside that we would need. What else is there to say about Derrick Henry in 2024? All offseason long, we spent time talking about how safe his floor was going to be, regardless of what you thought about the upside. Derrick Henry didn't care what you thought about the upside. He's the best running back in all of football right now, and I don't care what the matchup is, this Baltimore offense makes it look easy, and so does Derrick Henry. I absolutely love seeing Nick Chubb back out on the field last week, and he was able to score a touchdown. That was massive. Now, the workload that we're used to seeing Nick Chubb get, he's not going to get for a while, and he may not even have that type of workload this season. So right now, just play it cool with Nick Chubb. If you've got other options that you could start over him that you feel good about, I would rather go that route for the next couple of weeks as he continues to build up. But if you don't have anybody else, you can start Nick Chubb and really just hope that they're able to find some touchdowns with him. Jameis Winston starting at quarterback right now could end up being a good thing for Cleveland, and it could lead to more red zone opportunities for Nick Chubb. For Tennessee and Detroit, I feel like fantasy points are either going to be really hard to come by or all these guys are going to end up having solid fantasy days. Now, Detroit is still allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position, but over the last few weeks, they've given up some pretty decent games to not only Kenneth Walker, but also this past week to Aaron Jones. Now, I don't think Tony Pollard has the same upside as those guys, especially with Mason Rudolph starting at quarterback, but he could still end up having a decent day. I would be very weary about expecting way too much, though. The Tennessee defense, for as good as it's been against the pass, has been really good against the run as well. So the Lions running back could be in for a really big test this week. And a lot of it is going to depend on David Montgomery. He had to be helped off the field last week, and he ended up coming back later in the game, unfortunately fumbling the football. Jahmyr Gibbs was the guy against Minnesota, though. And if anything flares up with David Montgomery throughout the week, it could be Jahmyr Gibbs once again leading this backfield. James Conner's coming off a really good game that was a tough matchup against the Los Angeles Chargers. And now he gets a Miami defense that's way easier to run on. The Dolphins are allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to the running back position, and they're tied for the 2nd most rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs as well. So yeah, if we're locking in any running backs this week, it feels like James Conner needs to be in that conversation. But for Arizona, their defense has struggled against the run for a majority of the year so far. But they did a really good job of limiting J.K. Dobbins against the Chargers last week. Going up against Devon Achane is going to be a little bit more of a difficult process, however, and a lot of it's going to depend on whether or not Tua ends up playing this week. If Tua plays, it opens up this entire offense, and it's going to allow Achane to be explosive once again because you're going to have to worry about those speedy wide receivers. So let's keep an eye on Tua throughout the rest of the week before we start talking in definitives about Devon Achane. If Tua plays, he's definitely a low-risk start. If Tua doesn't play, then maybe we should be talking about him more as like a mid-risk instead. It only took the New York Jets firing their head coach, demoting their offensive coordinator, and trading for Davante Adams for Breece Hall to become the RB1 that we drafted him as. And now he gets a killer matchup going up against the New England Patriots, who allow the 4th most rushing yards, the 3rd most fantasy points, and they're tied for the 2nd most rushing touchdowns allowed to running backs. And right now, Breece Hall's projection for the week over on Underdog is only 69.5 rushing yards. That projection feels like it should be way higher for me. And I've got several other pick'ems that we're going to be talking about during this video. So why don't you head on over to Underdog right now if you haven't done so already and get signed up using code word headliners so you can play all of these pick'ems with us, so you can get a special pick'em for signing up with our code, and so you can get a deposit bonus for up to $1,000. But you're also going to be entered into a giveaway to receive a framed autographed Jonathan Taylor jersey. So what are you waiting for? Head on over to Underdog, create a new account with code word headliners, and after making a deposit of at least $10, play in your first contest using the pick'ems that we're talking about in this episode, and you'll be entered into a drawing to win this jersey. Now, running backs aren't doing a great job scoring against the New York Jets, but the Jets are allowing the 7th most rushing yards. But right now, I'm not 100% clear on how healthy this backfield is with Rhamondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson. Unfortunately, last week, negative game script killed Rhamondre Stevenson. And even at the start of the game, you could tell he probably wasn't 100% healthy. So keep an eye on both of these guys. And if anyone were to miss, maybe we need to take a look at JaMycal Hasty, who ended up finding the end zone. But we'll talk about that more later in the week if we need to. Just like Breece Hall, things seem to be trending up for Bijan Robinson as well. Even in their loss last week, he still had 21 carries, over 140 total yards, and a touchdown. And over his last 2 games, he has almost 200 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns. We should absolutely be rolling him out as our RB1 once again because the numbers he's putting up justifies it. Just keep your fingers crossed he keeps doing it the rest of the season. Now, Atlanta is a tough matchup for running backs. They allow the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. But not only that, this backfield is a little bit of a mess right now because you've got Rachaad White, Sean Tucker, and Bucky Irving all splitting snaps and touches. If I had to look at one guy from this offense this week, it's going to be Rachaad White though, and we saw why on Monday Night Football. Mike Evans is injured and out, and Chris Godwin is done for the season. they're going to need some pass catchers. And that's really where Rachaad White does his best work and will likely end up seeing a decent amount of targets moving forward. I don't necessarily hate this matchup for Josh Jacobs. Jacksonville's defense has been pretty good against the run this season, but that's partly because every team in the world can pass on them and they can't stop it. So really for Josh Jacobs this week, it's not a question about whether or not he has fantasy value. It's about how much value does he have? Because if Green Bay just torches Jacksonville and they go up by quite a bit, you're not going to see a whole lot of Josh Jacobs this week. You'll probably end up seeing more Emmanuel Wilson. But even with that being said, I don't think we can run out and start Emmanuel Wilson either, because we really don't know when and how much workload he would end up getting. Really, honestly, this is just like an inconvenient matchup for us. If it was a super easy matchup, then we would be all for Josh Jacobs starting. If it was a super difficult matchup, then maybe we would look elsewhere. But it's a decent matchup that's really going to hinge on whether or not Green Bay just shoves Jacksonville out of the way and scores a ton of points. And that could end up affecting Tank Bigsby as well, but he's got a couple of things in play for him right now. The first being that Travis Etienne is not a lock to return this week. If he were, then yeah, Tank Bigsby may have a little bit less value for me, but he's shown that he's the clear lead running back right now, and he's playing extremely well. Coming off over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns last week, expect Jacksonville to establish the run with him and keep the ball away from Jordan Love in Green Bay as much as possible. Now, if the game gets out of hand, that's where Tank Bigsby were to lose a little bit of value. And if Travis Etienne does end up playing, maybe we need to try and establish just how high Bigsby's ceiling is by the end of the week. We'll be keeping an eye on Jonathan Taylor throughout the rest of the week. Last week, he definitely said he was starting to feel better and was closer to returning, but how close to returning will be a question going up against a Houston defense that is a little bit more difficult to run against. And if Jonathan Taylor for some reason can play, he's still going to be on the risky side for me, not knowing whether or not he's at 100%. If Jonathan Taylor doesn't play, I don't know if Tyler Goodson or Trey Sermon really will be the answer for our fantasy lineups either. But this is a great matchup for Joe Mixon. Indianapolis right now is allowing the 3rd most rushing yards on the season. And a lot of those yards came from Joe Mixon in week 1. He's back. He's healthy. He looks good. This is a great offense for him. And even last week when CJ Stroud struggled, Joe Mixon still had a really good game. Go ahead and head on over to Underdog, where his current projection of 74.5 rushing yards feels way too low, and let's go higher. It really feels like Alvin Kamara's fantasy value for this season is slowly spiraling out of control. Over the last 5 weeks, he's only ran for over 3.5 yards per carry one time. And with the injury to Derek Carr now, it's making things even more difficult. And even though he's averaging 8 targets per game over the last 4 weeks, he hasn't even been able to find himself as an RB1 during that time frame. He's RB14 over the last 4 weeks, and he only has 1 game where he has scored more than 15 fantasy points. So the ceiling that you typically see come with 8 targets per game for a running back just still isn't there for Alvin Kamara right now because of how poorly he is running on the ground. It's not all his fault. But until this offense gets healthy with Chris Olave and Derek Carr, it's going to be really tough for Alvin Kamara to find that upside that we want. The New Orleans Saints defense is allowing the 5th most rushing yards, fantasy points per game, and touchdowns to the running back position. Last week, J.K. Dobbins had a really solid matchup. It didn't work out all that well. This week, he also has a solid matchup. Fingers crossed, it works out a whole lot better. But his floor this week should end up being super solid still, and hopefully the ceiling is a whole lot better. We need to keep an eye on the Bills' backfield over the course of the next couple of weeks. First thing, Ray Davis is making a play for way more touches and snaps in this offense. James Cook should be an easy, low-risk start in this matchup, but I don't really know if we're going to see more Ray Davis this week or not. James Cook is still the starter, and I don't think that that's going to change. But his ceiling could definitely be at risk here if we do see Ray Davis start to take more and more touches. he's been way more efficient than what James Cook has been as of recent. And I think we also need to note that the addition of Amari Cooper could end up hurting James Cook and the targets that we saw to begin the season. I'm not saying those are just going to disappear either, but Amari Cooper demanding a decent target share definitely could end up taking some away from Cook. So if you're a James Cook owner, you shouldn't be worried or you shouldn't be panicking as of yet. We will continue to monitor it. And if things start to change, that's when we may need to make some decisions about James Cook. But if you do have worries about this, maybe trading James Cook would be at his best value right now. Kenneth Walker, low risk for me this week in this matchup. Now, Zach Charbonnet did play more snaps last week than what he typically does, and there's a couple of factors for that. Number one, the score of the game. They started giving him more touches towards the end of the game. But also, Kenneth Walker had been dealing with an illness, so they probably spelled him a little bit more often than what they're used to. Kenneth Walker, as long as he's feeling good, should be back out on the field 100% and seeing a majority of the touches and snaps once again. This week, the Carolina Panthers will be losing to the This week, the Carolina Panthers will be playing the Denver Broncos, and based on what Denver did to New Orleans last week, I've got a lot of concerns about the Carolina Panthers. I don't really want to play anyone in this matchup. Not only is the Denver defense extremely good in all areas of the game, but then we have to deal with the fact that if we're talking about Chuba Hubbard specifically, this could end up being a negative game script, and Chuba may not be able to run all that much. And because of that, the volume won't be there to help prop up the low efficiency that he could end up having in this matchup. I've got no worries about the Denver Broncos, though. In fact, Javonte Williams currently has a projection over on Underdog of 55.5 rushing yards, and I'm definitely going to go over that projection because this matchup is spectacular, and Javonte Williams looked great on Thursday Night Football a week ago. Even if you want to throw in a touchdown parlay, including Javonte Williams, I would go that route as well. But over on Underdog, both of those options would be extremely reliable because Javonte Williams could go off once again. Kansas City and Las Vegas, and Kareem Hunt has been super solid since taking over as the starter while Isaiah Pacheco is dealing with his injury. And this week in this matchup, he definitely has that super solid floor once again. I'm not expecting a ton of upside every single week with Kareem Hunt, but in this offense, he should definitely give you a good enough floor that he's either an RB2 or a flex play for you. And not only that, but Kansas City is dealing with injuries all over the place right now, especially when it comes to their wide receivers. So I would anticipate seeing a really strong run game once again. Hey, just popping in to tell you that Kansas City allows the fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. Zamir White sucks, and Alexander Madison shouldn't be anywhere near your lineup. See you later. Unfortunately, the Jaden Daniels rib injury is going to keep us from seeing the number 1 and number 2 draft picks face off against each other. Now, maybe Jaden Daniels does end up playing, but from what Dan Quinn said, it sounds like it's going to be more week to week than day to day for Daniels. So maybe we just need to hope for the running backs to keep us entertained. And DeAndre Swift burned me a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going to repay him the favor, and I'm going to make him my Manscaped must-start running back of the week. He's got at least a touchdown and 70 rushing yards in each of his last 3 games, and he's got another solid matchup again this week. And if you're looking for the perfect Christmas idea or other gifts for the holidays, head on over to manscaped.com and use our code word HEADLINERS20. Take a look at all of their amazing tools, use our code word, get 20% off and free shipping. Stocking stuffers and things to toss under the tree is exactly what Manscaped is going to be able to do for you. But not only that, I like Swift so much this week, I'm going to head on over to Underdog and I'm going to take him to score a touchdown in this matchup as well. Hopefully Chicago moves the ball well down the field, and if they do, Swift should be able to find the end zone. Now, Brian Robinson doesn't have the same upside that DeAndre Swift does this week, but if there's no Jaden Daniels, Washington is going to have to run the football, and they're going to have to establish it. It's not a great matchup for Brian Robinson, but as long as he isn't phased out of the game, we absolutely should see decent workload for him and decent enough volume that it makes him a safer start with just lesser upside. Kareem Hunt had a solid day against this same San Francisco defense last week, and Rico Dowdle hopefully will be in for a very similar day this week. But the question remains is, how efficient is this Cowboys offense? Because right now, it doesn't look great. And after getting absolutely pummeled by the Detroit Lions, it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back. Rico Dowdle to me should be considered for your flex spot, but I would take other higher upside plays over him still. Dallas is currently allowing the second most fantasy points per game to the running back position, and this may be one of the final times that you get to use Jordan Mason this season, because reports are starting to show that Christian McCaffrey could be nearing a return in the next couple of weeks. We will keep an eye on that, and we will see what ends up happening. If you have Jordan Mason, run with it as long as you possibly can, especially if you have Christian McCaffrey. But if you don't have Christian McCaffrey, maybe after a big game, you should start looking to move Jordan Mason and reinforce your team so you don't lose a running back here at the end of the season. The Pittsburgh Steelers are allowing the 5th fewest fantasy points to the running back position right now. If it was just Tyrone Tracy or just Devin Singletary, then maybe we could take a shot at one of them and hopefully they give us at least okay flex numbers. But now that both of them are going to be splitting touches and snaps in this type of a matchup, it's just not going to be worth trying to roll with either of them. And Najee Harris had one of his better games of the season this past week, and maybe that's a sign of things to come with Russell Wilson if he continues to be the starter. But go ahead and just have a little bit of risk associated with Najee still because of how inefficient he's been this season. Going up against the Giants this week, hopefully some of that efficiency from last week sticks with him and that the game script doesn't end up phasing him out and he doesn't get nearly as many touches as we would like. Well, Headliner Nation, there you have it. My start and sit analysis for the running back position here in week 8. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do it now and turn on the bell notifications. I've got 3 more videos coming for you in the next 2 days. So make sure you're locked in and you're ready to set your lineup. But for now, Headliner Nation, stay safe and stay healthy, and I'll catch you all next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.